So the ultimate nature of reality is very essential in Buddhism, or the view of emptiness, so to say. And then it's why is that so essential? Because it eliminates ignorance. Yeah, ignorance is the root of all forms of suffering, is the root of all afflictions, of all destructive emotions. So this ignorance is a concept or mind that apprehends or holds on an I and mine to exist independently, to exist from its own side, to exist inherently, to exist very solid, right? So there is nothing that can exist in such a solid, independent way, because everything is in the nature of dependence, right? So if you look in your body or in your mind, you cannot find anything that's solid as the I appears. Yeah? So that I that appears very solid, existing from its own side, inherently, that's what we call the I that has to be refuted, or that's what we call that particular I or this self is not there. So that particular self does not exist the way it appears. It appears in a particular way, but it doesn't exist exactly as it appears. Yes, very concrete, existing from its own side. So that's what we say, we empty of that self. But there's a conventional body, there's a conventional mind, there's a conventional imputation based on this mere collection of the body and mind. We say that is tenets and Namdak, right? So that means that there is something there, and we know that if we feel things, that we have an experience, right? So that means there is a body, there is a mind, there is an experience, but there's no solid from its own side existing entity or inherent I to be found. So that distinction we should make, that there is no from its own side existing self, because everything is in nature of dependent origination. But on the conventional level, there is a mere kind of I, or mere person, or mere self, that is just imputed or labeled or named upon the mere collection of the body and the mind. And we see many things are just merely imputed. Just one very simple example, right? I went recently to a garden party with the Queen in Buckingham Palace, and with a friend of mine, and we came out of the gate. And there was a lot of people staying outside, tourists and people looking. So we were coming out of the gate, and then they saw us. They go, "Oh, important persons." So I talked to my friend and said, "Look, now they think we're important." And then we passed the gate, and we were with the people together. And then I told my friends, "You see, now we're just normal people." Right? So it's just, you can see at a particular time people grasp to, "Oh, this is an important person." But then you mix with an important person, people don't notice you anymore, and then you can see it was just merely imputed by the mind. But it appears very concrete at that particular time, but it doesn't exist in that way. It's just a label. Yeah. So ultimate reality is very important in the Buddhist doctrine. Yeah, and conventional reality is also very important. So we have a subject called the two truths, right? So the two truths helps us to understand what exists and how things exist. So we have a conventional truth and an ultimate truth. And it's very important to understand those two truths. Yeah? So this Dalai Lama often indicates the best way to proceed in Buddhism. First study the two truths, then the Four Noble Truths, and then you understand the refuge. And why is that so? Because if you study the two truths, you understand how ignorance creates an affliction, and how affliction creates a particular activity or karma, and how that produces suffering, right? So there's a conventional reality. Then you see ignorance and you analyze it, and then ignorance has to be analyzed, and then you see, oh, does it exist the way it appears? This I and mine, yeah, that seems to appear very concrete, existing from its own side. So then ultimate reality comes into the picture. Yeah. Then on top of that, you can see that, okay, destructive emotions, they can be eliminated, right? And they can be eliminated by correct understanding of reality. Yeah, so you understand basically the Four Noble Truths of the truth of suffering, the cause of suffering, the true cessation, and the true paths. Yeah? And then from a point of view of an individual perspective, you can see, I can accomplish that. I can eliminate destructive emotions. I can realize ultimate reality. And that's, for a Buddhist practitioner, the real refuge, right? The refuge in your own accomplishment of abandonment of afflictions, your own accomplishment of the realizations of ultimate reality or emptiness. Yeah, so that's kind of how you structure the two truths, Four Noble Truths, and going for refuge eventually. Yeah? So then, in order to understand that process better, you need to understand what the two truths are, and in particular, with relation with ultimate reality. And within the Buddhist view of philosophy, we have four different tenets. Yeah? And the 4 different tenets have different interpretations with regards to what exists and what does not exist. Yeah. So the conventional truth, we have various interpretations. Ultimate truth has various interpretations. And yeah, for the Buddhist practice, ultimate truth is very important to understand. So, for example, to summarize it a little bit, what's happening in the 4 tenets is kind of, how does this I appear? Yeah, the I or the mind that exists, seems to exist, or appears to exist from its own side inherently, we say that's kind of a view of ignorance that has to be eliminated, right? So then how does it I appear, right? And what does exist and does not exist? That's a very important field. And that's been clearly set out in the various Buddhist tenets. For example, in the Sutra school and in the Great Exposition school of Buddhist philosophy, we only talk about 2 levels of a self that does not exist, meaning a self that is permanent, unitary, and independent, right? So the I appears in various ways, and we see, does it exist the way it appears? So you can see it cannot be permanent because my mind is changeable, my body is changing, so there's nothing permanent to be found. So that's kind of a more coarser form of how the I appears, right? In a permanent, kind of uniform or only existing from its own side without any divisions. Yeah. So that's kind of a quite easy view to refute. There is no self that is permanent as such. Yeah. Then you can go to the next level and the more subtler one. Then think, okay, then maybe there is something that is controlling everything, what we technically call a self-sufficient, substantial existing self. Or you can think about a modern example, a pilot in a plane, right? The people in the plane, for the act of flying and be safe, they depend on the pilot. But the pilot doesn't really depend on the people for the act of flying, right? So that means that sometimes it appears that I appears to be the controller, right? And decides what to do, this or that. So also, if there's a certain amount of a controller, then there should be dependence between body and mind. Yeah? So you can also analyze, where is this controller? Yeah, if it's one with your body, then you see many parts in your body, so it cannot be one with the body. You see your mind, there's many aspects of the mind, many different moments of consciousness. So you can actually reason that this pilot approach of the controller, so to say, over the aggregates, the controller over body and mind, doesn't exist as a separate entity from the body and the mind, right? So you reason that and you come to the conclusion it doesn't exist. Then you go a step further and become more subtle. Then, for example, in the autonomy school, then they say, okay, what does exist and what does not exist? Then they say, okay, there's no truly existing I without dependence on anything else, right? They refute that. But if you look, what is the person? They say the main mind or the main consciousness that goes from this life to the other lives, right? So what we call the illustration of a person, according to their view. So they say the consciousness, the main mind, so to say, is the person, right? So then you go a step further to the consequence school and they say, where is this main mind? Where is, if you look for it, as you say, because autonomy school says if you look for it, you can find it. You need something to find in order to impute a person or to label a person. So you can find this consciousness. So then the consequence school said, but if you look in the moments between past, present and future, if you look in you can subdivide every moment into split seconds, and that you can subdivide again and again. So you can actually not find a consciousness that is out there from its own side. Everything is interdependent, right? So then in the consequence school they go to the more subtle view of everything is merely imputed by the mind. Even what we call the basis of imputation is imputed by the mind. Yeah, so there's various levels of Buddhist views in order to understand the more subtler views. We first have to understand the coarser ones and then move on into the process of understanding reality a bit better. Yeah.